thanks for coming on to the What Really Matters podcast this
Thanks for having
morning.
me.
No problem at all. Really looking forward to talking to you and finding out a little bit more about your story. As we just said off camera, well, it was on camera because we're on Zoom, but that we haven't met before, so it'd be really interesting to find out more about yourself. Would you like to say what your role is as well, just for people that are listening?
Sure, yeah. So I'm the Chief Executive of the National Youth Agency. For those that aren't familiar with NYA, we are the national body for youth work in England. Um, and we do all the really important stuff, but it's quite, I mean, I have to say it's the boring bit, but it's absolutely crucial. We do all the youth work qualifications, training standards, safeguarding. We do a lot of work with government departments regarding trying to improve and embed youth work in policy. We work with politicians all over the country, do lots of stuff that's sort of in that kind of national leadership role as well. So yeah, keeps us on our toes.
Definitely keeps you busy, and may I say, it's needed more than ever now. So when you say the boring stuff, if the boring stuff doesn't work, we're in trouble. So more power to you.
I agree, and I mean when I started 7 years ago, quite a lot of that boring stuff. It's not that boring. We find it, the geeks in the NYA find it really exciting and interesting, but a lot of it wasn't good enough or wasn't in place, and so the youth sector has been on its journey over the last 15 years or so, and it was time to rebuild things, and we've been able to do that.
Wow, I am definitely going to touch on that in a little bit. But first of all, I'd love to find out a bit more about yourself. What it was like for you growing up, where you grew up, what the challenges were, what the positives were, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Berkshire, so kind of classic Middle England. I grew up on the what was Europe's largest housing estate at the time. It was quite a nice place. Um, uh, Dad worked in London, mum worked in the NHS. Fairly straightforward. I mean, I am quite dyslexic. That wasn't discovered till I went to college. So all through school, zero assistance or knowledge or help with any of that. Kind of, I hate saying that. It was all different times where the world was just not as switched on or aware of special needs and educational needs, or particularly learning disabilities. So I seriously struggled through education at school, and went to a all boys comprehensive, bullied to hell. I mean, my God, I was, as my overriding memory of secondary school was just being bullied non-stop. Um, yeah, and my kind of love at school was chemistry, so I always wanted to further my career where I was like, I'm going to go become a scientist, I'm going to become a chemist. But actually, I'm not that academically astute in the chemistry world. Let's put it that way. So, although I did get a job in science before I moved into youth work, but yeah, so that's like kind of my basic background.
That's interesting you say that because I found out later on in life that dyslexia was part of my journey, and I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure my daughter probably will end up being on that journey. And you're right, it's a different world we live in now, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a huge percentage of youth workers that have got dyslexia, dyspraxia, or various different form of
Yeah, no, doubt.
learning needs or disabilities, and I think that's why overall that makes us brilliant youth workers because we can relate to young people better. I think our emotional intelligence is way higher, and well, we're just as intellectually intelligent, but sometimes let's be clear, the way our education system works doesn't value that. So, the EQ, as they say, the emotional intelligence is way high, really high in youth workers, and that's what makes us a cut above the rest.
I agree. And Lee, what with AI and everything else that's coming through the technological world, the one thing that they really can't replicate is those soft skills. So, as much as we may not be valued as much as we should be now, fingers crossed, the work that you guys are doing and the way the world is going, that those kind of skills will be more valued because, yeah, they are needed more than ever. Interestingly, you didn't mention youth work as a young person. Now, was that not something you
Oh,
come
okay.
across or?
Well, no. So, I'll give you my youth work journey, but there's the long and the short version. So the shortish version, or the middle version, is well, I went to secondary school at 11, and my school said we're going to take all year 11s kayaking down the Ardèche River in France,
Hmm.
um, which we must just about scrape the money together to do. And then my mum went, "You're not going anywhere near a bloody river unless you've had some lessons." So I was promptly over the summer enrolled on a local canoe club in Reading called the Warren Canoe Club, and the Warren was run by Berkshire Youth Service, so it was part of Berkshire Youth and County Council, doesn't exist now, but did then. And I did a summer of canoeing. Anyway, the trip to the Ardèche went wrong. The company went bust. We never got our money back, and we never went. But um, I carried on kayaking, and there were youth workers obviously within the canoe club because that was how it was run for part of outdoor learning. And then about when I got to about 15, the lead youth worker who was responsible for the whole place grabbed me and said, "Oh, I've got a project. I wondered if you'd like to get involved in." It was about helping young people. What we now call social action, I guess, but back then was kind of just volunteering or doing good stuff in their communities. I can't remember the exact language that Jenny used, but and I was a classic 15-year-old of like, not that interested in that. That sounds really dull. And then she asked me again, and I was like, "Oh, go on then." So I went along to this meeting at local youth centre. I can't remember. Yeah, and I turned up, and I was like, "I don't know anybody here. I don't know why I'm here. What am I doing?" Um, We fast forward sort of 6 months later, I'm chair of the board of a new organisation that was sort of established to help young people across Reading take action, in community projects, well, not necessarily volunteering their time, but in terms of making their communities better. That fast forwarding again, that turned into a charity called Reading Youth Action, and Reading Youth Action secured the very first Millennium Volunteers grant, if anyone remembers Millennium Volunteers from back then. And yeah, we got 2 or 3 staff, and it kind of went from there. So that was my so I kind of worked, and alongside all that, very same youth centre that first meeting was in. I became a sort of volunteer youth leader in the evenings, 16, 17 at this point. Did my level 3 youth work qualification. Became a sort of worker in charge, as we would call today, and then progressed from there. In parallel to that, though, I was going to Reading College, and I did a GNVQ in science. Because of my dyslexia, that took me an extra year, so I ended up doing 3 years to get through that. Ironically, I came out the other end with like 6 A-level equivalents in it because they make you keep adding modules. So I felt like I got a very large GA level kind of expanse at that point equivalent. But anyway, that was all in science, and I got a job working with Cadbury Schweppes in their laboratories, which are based at Reading University, and testing chocolate bars and drinks and lots of other stuff for other companies as well, from McDonald's, Sainsbury's, all sorts of people. We were testing kind of the chemical content of food. When you see when you buy something on the side, it will say what's included. It was our job to kind of double check all that and work out the calorie content and all that kind of stuff. And actually, originally I thought this was great. Science. I got a job in science, and it paid really, really well for an 18, 19-year-old. But I quickly realised it was quite boring testing chocolate bars for their fat content day in, day out. I mean, you knew it was 22%. You didn't need the machine to pop up and tell you what the result was. It was exactly the same every time, and that gets quite dull. But the chief executive of the laboratories where I worked was really supportive, and I every now and again he'd come by and and I'd have a chat with him what's going on. And I said, "Oh, I've got this volunteering thing I'm involved in. Young people got this." And I said, "Well, could I host one of our board meetings? Because there was a lovely boardroom on the 4th floor." And I said, "Could I borrow the boardroom one evening just to host a board meeting?" And he said, "Yeah, sure, come and help." Anyway, then he popped his head into this board meeting and just sat in the corner and listened. And I thought, "Oh my God, what's going on?" But never mind. And he was really supportive. And then he grabbed me the next week and said, "Yeah, I love what you're talking about. Can we help?" So I said, "Well, yeah." Anyway, I ended up being released 1 day a week to go and work and support the charity, and then and then more time was offered as well to allow me to go and work on the sort of charitable work. And then I got to about 21 at this point, and he said to me, "You're in the wrong profession, Sunshine. You need to go and find a different career." And he said, "Clearly, youth is your passion. You should go and follow that." But at that point, I'd already applied to the University of Reading and got my degree place. So it was a sort of. I then handed in my letter and said, "Well, I'm glad you're having this conversation because I'm off." And I went to Reading University, did my degree in youth work. Yeah, and then I've been all sorts of jobs since then.
Interesting. Interesting stuff. Just something very quickly, just because I know you touched on it earlier on, and obviously it must have been probably difficult to get to the positions that you are now. But just straight away, is there anything that you would say to any young person that may be watching this, or any parent that may be watching this, where their child is being challenged with dyslexia whilst growing up? What would you say was the things that kind of, by looking back now, maybe and reflecting on it, that helped you, or some kind of words of advice or support for anyone that may be going through those challenges? Because you've done all right. Very
Yeah,
well.
I mean, if you'd have told 14-year-old Leigh what he'd be doing at 44, he wouldn't have believed you. So he wouldn't have thought that you were absolutely barking mad. Um, I mean, I think that's a really good set of questions. I look, I think life is about luck. You make a bit of luck, but you get your opportunities as well. So you have to kind of put yourself in the right place to create that luck to some extent. Um, but beyond that, my general motto in life is if you don't ask, you don't get. So if you don't try, if you don't ask the question, then what's the worst that can happen? Someone says no, and you're no better or worse off than when you asked. So my kind of, and I guess when you're young and you're not burdened by life and bills and mortgages and all the rest of it, just be unhindered in going and asking questions. And I think whether that was me holding counsellors to account over the years about decisions they've taken, or and this might be way back when I was a young person, like why isn't there a youth shelter in the park that my mates and I can hang around in, or whether it's why can't I get decent work experience because there isn't support available, whatever it would be. Just never hesitate to ask lots of questions, and be tenacious. I mean, I just be a pain in the backside is your right. You have a right to be heard and seen and be there. So turn up, be active. And I guess that was youth work was my escapism from bullying of school. But it was also something I found I was quite good at. I mean, it was just I really enjoyed being around other young people who all got their own issues and problems and challenges. That was, my old youth club was a bit of a club full of real misfits, but together we were quite a tour de force. We were quite a power. So yeah, don't hold yourself back.
Thank you for those wise words. And I think you kind of answered this really with what you said then. But do you feel like you had your voice heard when you were growing up, or did you
Um,
make it heard?
well, I think yes and no in different places. So at school, absolutely not. And my school report says he's nice but dim. I mean, literally written on the school report. When you think, well, that's a nice way of that's a really good way of building you up and making you feel good about yourself. And so, and I think being an all boys school, there was fairly macho culture. And so I did not fit in well there at all. And I did not enjoy it, and nor did I feel remotely listened to when I was complaining or raising that I'm feeling got at by an awful lot of people, and this just is unfair, and you're doing nothing about it. And toughen up, lad. That's what you've got to deal with. Is a school like this. And you think, well, great, that's not really helpful. But then I think in other space and places, yes, I was heard. I think when we were setting up the charity and we were a group of 16, 17-year-olds at this point trying to build this stuff, and it really irritated us that you couldn't be at that point, you couldn't be on a charitable board under age of 18. You couldn't hold because of financial liability risks. And so we wrote to the charity commission and said, this is wrong. We're a group of 15, 16, 17-year-olds. We want to run our own charity. Why can't we? Particularly when you're 16, you could pay tax, you could do those, get a job, and so why can't I be on a charitable trustee? And so they changed the rules that allowed young people to be trustees but without financial liability. And I thought, wow, actually, we'd make quite a difference. And a great story of trying to negotiate the Millennium Volunteers contract as a 19-year-old, just sit in front of one of the most senior civil servants in the Department for Education, he'd basically got a number that he needed to hit. So for every young person, Millennium Volunteers, for those that don't remember it, were you got paid an amount of money for every young person that did 200 hours of volunteering over X years. And he wanted, like, I don't know, £500 per every young person we would get through, and I wanted 1,000. And and I was like, we're a youth-led charity, right? We're a bit more expensive, a bit more complicated because we're all young people. We need lots of help and support. I want 1,000 or I'm not doing it. Anyway, got to like 850. He said, no, I can't go any higher. I said, well, I can't do a deal, and got up and walked out. The thing is, this guy, who's director of the Department for Education, was absolutely perspiring. I've never seen anyone since sweat so much in front of me. This guy was really used to bullying people, right? I mean, I guess people come into the department and just the director is a big, big senior job. So, he gets his own way a lot. And there was this gobby 19-year-old. I was very polite. I was in a suit. I looked the part, but I was like, I'm really sorry. We can't do this. Anyway, I said, well, we're off. Thanks. No trouble at all. And I got in the lift and went all the way down. And the receptionist came running over and said, stay there, sir. The director's coming down to talk to you. And he came down the lift after me and he just said, right, all right, 1,000, and shook my hand and we've done the deal. But, just so know your boundaries, really. Know what you're worth and know where you make a difference.
I don't know. I got a funny feeling is not knowing your boundaries probably helped you there. Because actually, if you probably went down the followed the letter of the not the law, but what was expected of you, you wouldn't have done that. And the fact that you did do that was the thing that actually kind of that got you to get what you were hoping to get for other people. So maybe it is
I mean, I think that
push the boundaries.
possibly, I think you're true. But I mean, I think even as an adult, even recently, in my current job, I negotiate funding for the organisation things, and I've said to funders, I'm really sorry, we can't do this deal. We'll have to walk away, and they don't want to do that. They want to give you money, right? Most of the time, people want to hand out money. They just don't want to give you as much as you want, so you have to hold your line. Yeah,
Wow. Okay. Well, that right there is a good example of saying what getting your voice heard and acted upon, which is sometimes where that whole kind of thing falls apart. I mean, I'll go straight into the next question, but just a little aside. I mean, it's interesting hearing you say that story, and I'm sure lots of people have got their own versions of different stories, especially people that work in youth work. Those kind of those moments. I am finding it more and more now that young people have grown up and they've got no idea what youth work is. They've had no experience of youth work. They've had no experience of these other options and opportunities that can support people. Like what you just said, it might be due to things that are going on at home. It might just be because they want to have a space to spend with their friends, but they've literally got no concept of how they could be supported to make a difference. And
yeah.
we are really, really, really starting now from ground level. So it is amazing to hear those stories of what is possible, because anything is possible if you're willing to push it and challenge yourself and challenge others.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, you've got to just. I've never been good at taking no for an answer to some extent, and sometimes you come across dead ends a lot. And my job is to get a map out and zoom in and try and find a way around, to find a shortcut or find another way to get to where you want to get to. It might take a bit longer, it might be a harder trek. But you've got to just be tenacious, I think, in trying to find your way. But you're absolutely right. There is an entire generation and a half, nearly, I think, of young people and young adults now who have never experienced youth work like I did. Right? I mean, I was really lucky that the youth workers that ran that youth canoe club, that ran the youth centre I worked in and around, were there, guided me, supported me. They saw the potential and they saw, how to assist me. And I'm still in touch with some of those guys now, which is absolutely fabulous. But yeah, it's terrifying that actually there's a whole generation of young people that have not got a clue what youth work is. And I think this is one of our problems because young people aren't, as a sector, I think this is one of our challenges, because there aren't lots of young people marching on the street demanding youth work because they don't know what it is.
Yeah.
When they do understand what it is and how it can make a difference, then they're going to be vocal. And so almost the sort of decimation of the youth sector, the scale we've experienced, has undermined the ability to build it back and undermine the ability to make the case for it. Now, there are NYA, UK Youth, and lots of others pushing very hard, working our damnedest to try and turn that around. But, it is tough. It is not easy.
No, and you're right when you say a generation. You are right. It is more than that. I'm working with the parents of young people haven't experienced it. And it's the staffing situation and the quality and the experience of those members of staff, and I suppose you probably would be like management kind of age range level and kind of above. Not that you have to be a certain age to be a manager, but you know what I mean. Like those skills and that experience is it's been lost in a lot of ways. But I mean, it's not all doom and gloom because at the end of the day, if you have the skills to pay the bills and you can support and engage young people and build those relationships, you know, you will get to those same levels as what we have done in the past, and we will have that. We will make the difference in the same way. I guess it. The trouble is, these things all take longer because of the starting point, and I guess that is something that needs to be recognised by funders. Is it is not a straightforward. You know, it's like the process in the is not the same, is it? It's not like you go
No,
to juniors, you go to intern sessions, you go to seniors youth club sessions, you do volunteering, you do leadership programs, you do activity based social. Like, don't get me wrong, that exists, but it doesn't exist in a widespread way that it once did in every community.
no,
Um,
no. I mean,
and
about a third of council areas have got nothing. A third have got some grants and a few £100 here, and maybe
a
£500,
lot of that's
£1,000.
targeted though as well, isn't it, Lee? That's not
Yeah,
even
yeah, yeah.
universal youth work.
And then the third have got, but the third have got stuff. Have got a youth provision is largely targeted. Although there's more universal out there than you think. And then a third have got nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing. So it is an absolute postcode lottery around the country.
I wonder whether you could say a little bit more about the job that you do. You know, so since you got into youth work, the kind of work that you've been doing, that career, and
Yeah.
explain a bit about that and why you've been doing it.
See, my career is it was really interesting. I did my final year at university whilst working full time as a peripatetic detached youth worker. So moved around different areas, tackling. Well, it was to tackle, on paper, it was tackle antisocial behaviour. In reality, we were dealing with gangs, we were dealing with massive exploitation of young people in really kind of upper class, nice areas. These are not sort of really challenged high poverty spaces. These were nice housing estates. But my role was to with my colleague Kevin, we were out and about every night of the week, and literally down in gravel pits because that's where the kids would go and hang out because nobody would bother them if they were in the bottom of a gravel pit in the evening. But we knew that's where the drug dealers and all the nasty people were going and finding them. So yeah, and I did that for a couple of years, and then I became a senior youth worker for North Reading, which I was still a highlight of my career in that I actually got to then go and run the canoe club that I started my career at. So it was
Ah,
sort
there
of
we go.
the
The
world coming round.
circle.
The world coming round in a circle was very nice. Yeah, when I managed to funnel, this poor canoe club had been limping on for years trying to survive, and then I got the job and suddenly moved loads of reserves into it and gave it loads of new kit, and we breathed life into it. Sadly, it's closed now, but yeah, so I ran attached youth work, outdoor learning, and three youth centres in north of Reading. From there, I went to Connections in Hampshire. I had a very brief career, I would say. That was the one job that didn't go well for me.
Oh,
Um,
hold on. Come on. Spoiler alert. Why?
Oh, I mean, lots of reasons. Mostly, though, I think it was a very careers orientated space, and I'd gone in with a youth work approach to try and bring more youth work into it, and that was why I was appointed, and it was still going to be a careers environment, and I learned a lot about myself in that job. I made plenty of mistakes in how I tried to implement my kind of expertise and discipline into an alien environment in some respects. And yeah, so I was there 18 months, and from there I went to Surrey, where I'm probably most famously known. So Surrey, I started off as a borough manager. Um, so Spelthorne, Ali G country, which was my area, 5 youth centres. That was always fun, and it was height of Ali G too. So the kids absolutely hated Ali G. I mean, it was really funny. Absolutely hated him, but he was everywhere. And then Staines on Thames, so Staines, which was Ali G. And yeah, from there I then moved in. But after a while, the cuts were starting to kick in, and deputy director. A new deputy director was recruited, and he needed to save large sums of money. He wanted to come up with new ways of doing things, and he wanted to pilot these new ways of doing things in my borough. So basically, he would ideally, would you move out of the way so I could kind of take over your borough and complete? And I'd been in this borough 4 years, sweat, blood, and tears, raised that got this place going really well. And I just refused to move and said, no, if you want to pilot stuff, give it here, and I'll have a go with it. And he slightly said, well, I thought he would, in hindsight, he was completely setting me up. He said, fine, but I want you to double the output of this service for slightly less money, through this new model. And anyway, fine. And then he said you've got 6 months to do it. Anyway, we did it in 3, and so we absolutely smashed the objectives and targets and sort of proved that if you freed us up from the bureaucracy of the local authority, if you freed us up to go and work in collaboration and partnership more, we could do it. So we were able to achieve that. And from there, I actually moved into local authority commissioning, because actually I was overseeing the contracts to the voluntary sector that was then given the youth service to run that new model. And I oversaw half the county of Surrey, and then moved into sort of more broader commissioning across the whole of children's schools and for families in the end, looking after all sorts of things from SEN, provisions, school spaces, all sorts of things. And then from there, I came to the NYA.
I can see how the steps you can just visualize it, can't you?
I think it goes back
today.
It goes back to my just being tenacious. When that deputy director had asked me to move, and I kind of refused. I mean, he literally turned up at the youth centre on a Thursday afternoon and sat me down on the sofa and said, look, I really want you to do this. And I said, I'm really sorry, I'm not budging. Knowing my HR rights as well, you can't just you can't just shift somebody out of the way. And again, all the way through, we kept Surrey's youth service. Surrey had the biggest youth service in Europe at one point. We grew its capacity, we grew its capability. Hats off to Jeremy and I, because Jeremy did half the county and I had the other half. That was hard. We worked really, really hard for years, but the youth workers were good. We had really good teams. It was an absolute privilege to work with really passionate experts. But the benefit of that was, and I guess one of the reasons I slightly cycled around to getting the NYA job is we used the NYA's quality mark to assess the quality of 40-odd youth centres across the county. So twice a year, they were all like mini Ofsteds. It wasn't treated like Ofsted, but it was like a mini sort of visual inspection and checking stuff. Well, that gave us files and files and files of evidence that I could use at every cabinet meeting or every meeting with ministers, with senior officials and directors of the local authority. So whenever the youth service came up for cuts, we'd just pull out boxes of this stuff and sort of waft it on their desk, and they go, oh, can't touch that, leave it alone. And that protected the youth service. I was most gutting when I got this job was, within 6 months, the whole thing had gone pretty much. And that was still very galling to this day.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard so many stories of people that were leading different council-run youth work provisions, organisations, boroughs, this, that, and the other. I mean, I can't imagine.
No.
Imagine the feeling. So just out of interest, when you started your job at the National Youth Agency, what was your hope? What were you hoping for? Because you must have thought, hello, this is the big time, baby. Or maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, I couldn't quite believe they'd offered me the job. I mean, I went through, was it?
Don't do yourself down. You just told us why.
No. Look. To anyone who's out there, imposter syndrome is I've been here 7.5 years nearly. I've run this job long enough to know how to do it reasonably well, I think. Imposter syndrome is still a regular daily thing, and I think that being humble is really, really, a strength as well. So, when I got the job, I thought, crikey, how am I going to approach this? I had no idea. I'd asked to see the accounts, but I hadn't really looked at the NYA in any great detail. I'd been a customer of the NYA, you see. So when I went to the interview, I just turned around and said, well, you're not very good as a supplier, because as a customer, I've been, really struggling. But I could see lots of ways in which we could improve how the NYA supports local authorities and does some of these things. But no, I mean, look, I was pretty terrified. I won't lie. I mean, I decided, so I did a little mini survey of 3 or 4 questions, which I asked all the staff to complete before I started. And I had all that, it was like a fortnight before I came. A couple of weeks before I started formally, I popped to Leicester and popped my head into the office and just said hi. And I thought that was really interesting. All these sort of terrified people looking back at you like, oh, it's the new boss, and I'm like, oh no, I don't. So I hate being called boss, right? I'm just Leigh. I'm just one of the team. I'm just a plucky youth worker that's done all right. I didn't. Nobody needs to stand on station because I walked through the door. But yeah, no. So it was interesting, and I guess the organisation I discovered was not the organisation I had expected. So it did not have anything like the finances that I believed it. I was starting with it. It was a lot weaker than I expected. I didn't know it had a lot of debts back then. It didn't. It had a lot of. We had there were challenges with just the way people. I guess for those that have been through years of cuts and cuts and cuts and being put through you know redundancy round after redundancy round. It was just an organisation that was exhausted from being on that treadmill, and as much as local authorities have had it hard. My God, the NWA lost all its funding in 2012, pretty much, right? 10 million to zero within months. It had been really tough here, this place. So and people who were still here had really weathered that, and it was on their faces. You could see it. So yeah, job one was just to give them some love and then discover what we got. So I spent weeks and weeks just talking to people, just going out and networking and trying to reconnect with people. And the thing I found quite sad, I guess, overall, was that a lot of the youth sector had even forgotten the NWA existed. It was because the NWA, when I trained, was a powerhouse. You got stuff in the post all the time. You got lots of information. There were all the magazines it used to produce. It was produced 14 odd magazines over his life. It used to get briefings, all sorts of stuff, and it all stopped because the money all stopped. And so the world had kind of forgotten what the NWA did. But to the absolute credit of the amazing people here, and some of those people are still here, they had kept the absolute fundamentals of our youth work qualifications and training going. So, our degree programs, our level 3, level 2 qualifications, they had kept all that going. Even in the darkest days, they managed to find the money to keep all that up and running. So that gave us something to build on. And we went from there, really.
Yeah, I mean, I just wonder because of the journey you've been on, the experiences that you've had, and it's by the way, it is quite refreshing to know that you come from the experience of going through the youth work journey, and you're in a position there where now hopefully you can impact on the wider questions and queries we've all got about how we get youth work to be a widespread service once again. No pressure.
Working on it, working on it.
But I mean, so with that one, on that note, is what have the conversations been then with government? Because this is the thing: if people are listening to this that don't know, you are, with other organisations as well, you are the face of people that are lobbying, talking to government, trying to get them to understand and value the need, if they don't already. Which, I mean, it'd be great to hear. Do they understand the need and do they value youth work? Because, and this is
Yeah,
obviously the new government.
well, and that's the problem. You have to answer that question in two ways: the previous government and the new government. So,
Well, answer in both ways, please, because that'd be interesting as well.
yeah, I think. I mean, the other thing I'll say, when I started the NYA, my level of naivety was epic, and that was probably for a good thing, or you'd have run away pretty quickly screaming, going, "Oh my God!" I guess. Um, no, I mean, look, for the first 7 years or so in this job was under the previous government, and initially there was zero interest in youth work, really. I mean, I'll tell you another story, but so you get the job and you get your induction plan, and they've mapped out, and on Tuesday next week you're going to go and visit the civil servants at the DCMS, and they've agreed to coffee with you. And I thought, okay, so I trundle off to London, and I go in. First time really I've been to Whitehall, other than a tourist. So in you go, and they sit you down, and the director said to me, was really honest, and she said, "Well, it's lovely to meet you, but we don't really do anything about young people or you. Well, we don't really do anything about youth work here." And I was like, "Oh." I thought that was in your brief. And she said, well, "Yeah, but we don't really do anything." And she's really honest and said, "There's just no there's not really the political input around. So civil servants do what ministers ask them to do, right? And ministers aren't asking them to do anything around youth services, so we don't really do much. So it's lovely to meet you, but yeah, and this will be a short and sweet conversation. And I thought, oh God. And so as I walk out the building, or she said, I'll walk you to the door. So I thought, oh, thanks. I mean, literally a 20-minute call, face to face. As I got in the lift, so whenever you go and meet people in Whitehall, sometimes they never come on their own. There's always a little entourage. So, there's always two or three people. Particularly if you meet a minister, you're never there on your own. There's always like three or four. But as I got in the lift, it was just me and the director in this lift, and she just grabbed me by the arm and she said, "Look, my mum and dad are both JNC qualified youth workers. I completely and utterly, I spent my entire childhood in youth centres. Oh, I completely understand why it's so important. We just don't have the political input here to kind of to do anything on it. But if you can make that, if you can change that, we will run at it." So I walked out that building going, right, don't know how the hell we're going to do this, but we're going to, there's some willingness. And I will say this, wherever I have been in any department or any ministerial area, there's always somebody who does get it, who is passionate, who wants to make a difference. It's just creating the conditions in which we can unlock their ability to do that. So anybody who saw the APPG inquiry that we ran for a year, and big hats off to Jonathan Hopkins, who worked with me for a long, long time. And Jonathan and I literally travelled the country, and we took over the APPG. So parliament,
What is
all
the
party,
APP? What? Oh, go on. You was
yeah,
gonna say.
all party parliamentary groups. So these
Yeah.
are cross-bench, cross-party groups of MPs who come together around topics and have, and they can do reports or they can just talk. And we said, and I went into the APPG, which was run by the British Youth Council and the YMCA back then. And I said, look, can I please take this thing over for a year? I want to, run an inquiry around youth services. Lloyd Russell Moyle was the chair of that at the time. No longer an MP, sadly, but brilliantly supportive individual. Lloyd had worked at the NYA when he was 18 as a youth voice advocate, so now an MP. So he'd written to me fairly quickly after I got the job. I was like, right, let's go and have a chat. Anyway, in the end, we ended up with nearly 200 submissions from the youth sector. If you print them off, it was about 1.5 meters tall. All this paperwork, if you printed it off, it was huge. We vast amounts of evidence. 60 MPs got involved in the inquiry, and we published a report that said, based on that evidence, that said there needed to be a focus on youth work, investment in youth workforce, national body, and a load of other, lots of other things. Youth voice had to be uprated, and that the nation needed proper youth services, properly resourced. That was then submitted to the government, and ministers looked at it. I think we were fortuitous in that by that point we had Mims Davis, so Conservative minister. And Mims to this day is probably one of YouthWork's #1 fans. And she read it and said, let's do it. Right, what do we need to do? So that led to the NWA getting its first grant from government in nearly a decade. And that's led to a lot of so I think we've rebuilt most of the foundations today of the youth sector. We're really in a good position to grow and build the youth sector now. That wasn't the story 7 years ago, but working with those civil servants were unlocked and off they went and sorted stuff out and got things done. And our grant has steadily grown. It's not massive, but it's a bit more than that now. So, it's about finding the talent and finding the passionate people within all the right spaces to connect. And I think with the new government, and I guess I'm sorry, sticking with the previous government, the Conservatives, every minister I've ever had, bar from the very first one, was very passionate about youth work and understood it and wanted to support us and do more. The Treasury, just not interested. Number 10, varying interest depending on which prime minister was in place. So when I talk about being in the gravel pits back in my very first full-time professional job, that was in Theresa May's constituency, and I'd bumped into Theresa May at various things over the years. So we wrote to her, and she hosted a thing in number 10 for us, and with young people, and was, so we got some rough interest, but no kind of, but she was too busy dealing with Brexit and all the rest of it. But pretty much other than that, no real prime minister prioritised youth at all. Not forget youth work, just young people.
Can I ask a question? Because I don't know. This is just something that comes out to me when you're talking about this. Do you think it's due to, because you just said then, that there was a bit of interest from Theresa May because she had a connection and some kind of understanding of the work. Is it because, and I know this is like a massive stereotype, but is it because many in within the Tory party, I don't know, potentially wouldn't have been living in those communities that would have been delivering youth work, which would have felt the impact of youth work before all those different cuts happened? Because I think part of it has got to be to what you felt, the experiences that you've had. If you don't believe that something works, then why are you going to bother? I
Yeah.
mean, it shouldn't be based on individuals' experiences, but I wonder if it is.
No, I
That's
mean, maybe for 10% of Tory MPs back then. But the vast majority, no. I mean, there's a real truth about Parliament, which is behind the scenes, MPs of any colour all get on really well. They collaborate. They are talking to each other in the cafes, the bars, the corridors. What you see on PMQs is not how the world really functions and works. In a way, I almost, party politics and the need to, when you're on stage, it's like panto, isn't it? So, um, but actually behind all of that, behind the curtain, it's so much more adult, it's so much more collegiate and professional. Um, and my experience is an awful lot of MPs on all sides of kind of really interested in youth work and understand it. Um, I think we get that's a different story when we move into professions. So, social care profession versus education versus youth work. I mean, there's all sorts of tensions there. And it's getting better, but it's definitely been a barrier at points. But no, I mean, look, I've worked with, I've had some really, some really important and helpful conversations with Conservative MPs who have been entirely privately educated and lived in compared to my upbringing a real life of privilege, who are really passionate about youth work, who can see the difference and benefit it makes. I think the challenge youth work has and has always had is demonstrating our impact.
Do
So
you think that has been demonstrated now and has this new government? Because when I say what I say, but it's not necessarily a target the Conservatives, because I can imagine probably a large part of the Labour Party now. I mean, there's probably a lot of people that would come from a certain level of privilege. They wouldn't necessarily have had felt the impact of youth work as well. So it's not a particular kind of poke at the Tories. But do you think that the Labour Party are looking at it differently? And if so, why? And what is that?
yeah, I mean, I think that's like yes, but for different reasons. Maybe not what your audience is thinking. So there's an adage, isn't there? There's no saying that you only know what you've lost once it's gone. And so, from a Labour perspective, particularly being in opposition, you can see once those youth services are gone, we've got what, a third more children in our children's social care now, which costs you far more money. You've got highest levels of mental health challenge, need and well-being need with young people. And there's no question there's a correlation between the removal of youth services and the increase in some of those acute services and cost demand. So, and the deterioration in young people's mental health and well-being as well, right? So it's easy from the outside looking in, like when you're in opposition looking into the world, to see, well, you've taken that out and that's the consequence. So Labour have the advantage of coming in and having been having observed that. I think when you're government and you're in it, as maybe the current government's discovering, right, being in government's quite hard work, and there's lots of information, lots of data, and all that kind of stuff coming at you. It's harder to see through that. So. I mean, I think the challenge when I talk about the impact challenge or the difference that youth work makes, I don't think we've moved that. I think we've moved it a bit, but I don't think we've moved it massively in the last decade. I think there are better tools. There's definitely more research going on now, which is definitely helping. But the youth work's always going to have a challenge because, or particularly open access youth work, is always going to have that challenge, and that it doesn't happen 9 to 5. It happens in unsociable hours or detached youth work, on the streets in the rain on a Friday night in the middle of winter. You can't sit there with a clipboard and a researcher to sit and observe and manage it, right? Just you can't do that like you could observe a prisoner in a prison or something where you could put a study around it. So our sector is always going to struggle to tell that story. And the challenge is, the question often is, how do you know it was that bit? Your Tuesday night youth work, Ben. How did they know that what you did on Tuesday nights with that group of young people made a difference versus what their school teacher did, what their parents did, what their networks, what their peers did? How can you guarantee me it was what your youth work did, Ben, that made that difference? And the answer is, unless you're spending vast amounts of money, you can't test that stuff. And if you did spend like vast amounts of money, young people run a mile because it wouldn't feel like a safe place to be measured. So nobody wants to be sitting there being counted. So um, I think our sector always struggles. What has shifted though for me is the threshold. So that under the Conservatives, the bar you had to meet to demonstrate your impact and to demonstrate that it would be worth spending public money was a lot higher. And I think what Labour have done, what Labour naturally do, because I think they're just a bit more interested in public services and poverty and need and communities, is that bar is lower. So there's still a threshold to hit, but it's easier for us to make a difference and demonstrate that than it was before. And I think that's just because and that's the political ideology, I guess, as well between the two parties. I think the Lib Dems understand it the best sometimes, which is quite interesting. I mean, now they've got 70 odd MPs, they could be more useful and more influential, so that's helpful. But yeah, so I think you've got that kind of there's always a threshold set for evidence of impact on youth work that we don't set for teachers or social workers, right? We accept a social worker does a good job. We accept a teacher does a good job. The state naturally assumes youth workers aren't doing a great job because it's that sounds a bit dramatic, but it is extreme. That's how I've experienced it. So because it's and it's always ping pong and pool in a youth centre. And when if you look through the windows of a youth centre, it can look like absolute chaos. Young people running around doing all sorts of stuff, playing games, activities, kicking a football around a hall. And that just looks like nice leisure stuff. Now, you and I know as professional youth workers that those are just the tools that we use to engage and keep young people engaged. And it's all the conversations on the side, and it's all the little, all the little activities we're doing around it, where the education comes in, where the difference is made. But beyond that, it's the fact that they come every Tuesday night to your project. That means when their life if they hit a problem, that they'll call you up and go on a Wednesday and go, Ben, my grand's died and I'm feeling really depressed. I don't know what to do. And you go, right, we'll come in and have a chat and sit down a cup of tea and we'll talk it through. That's harder to measure, right? How do you measure that way of working?
And so it really, really, really annoys me when I know like we all would have come up against this kind of what is youth work, all this kind of stuff. And I think of this stuff that, look, I mean, I can't talk for other people, but the things, the experiential learning that we deliver that links in with anything from psychology, sociology, social enterprise, teaching, scaffolding, we're literally like magpies. We magpie all this great stuff that we know works. We then develop stuff based on young people's wants and needs, which is not generally the same as other professions. And I just think if there's something that's holding back this becoming a widespread service again, and it literally is, then not a clear understanding of what this stuff can do. Unfortunately, it does end up being longitudinal, doesn't it? As in, you have to be able to do long-term research, which costs money.
Well,
and is it just numbers that they want? And that's always felt like a bit of the problem, that the richness of the stories. I mean, I could share these like stories of people that we've supported, and we've got distance traveled videos from the beginning of programs to the end, all this kind of stuff, and it absolutely transforms lives.
It does.
Trouble is, do they take that? Will they take that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems fundamentally is we're living in a data-driven world, right? Everything is show me the numbers, and the amount of money government spends on research and data is huge, right? I mean, not necessarily on youth work, but generally, it spends a vast amount to learn and understand. And one of the challenges the youth sector had is we had very few numbers. We just had very little data on everything. So, we didn't know where all the youth projects are in the country. So how do you know what bigger difference the youth sectors makes when you don't know what's out there? So in the old days, the MWA used to do its annual audits through local government. And because most youth projects were also funded in some way by local government, the local government could help you map it all. That's all changed, right? A third of local government has nothing. So you have to go. So we have the national census, which was just to create that kind of national baseline of who's out there doing what. And if you've not done that, if your listeners haven't done the census, for goodness sake, go and fill it in and get it done for us, because that is being used by government right now to help make decisions about future investment. And if you're not on it, they don't know you exist, and things like that are really, really key. There was no consistent curriculum for youth work, which is why we introduced the national curriculum. And 10 themes of what youth work breaks down into, and how you can articulate youth work and plan youth work and evaluate youth work. And again, if anyone's not using the national curriculum as a fundamental, you know, the glue that holds all your provision together and how you articulate the difference you're making, you're not helping the world, right? So it's so important that everyone gets consistent and uses those tools. And the training and development is available, and the support is now more and more available, and things like that. And unfortunately, we still, people really only get interested in youth work politically when it's the darkest days. So either there's a major safeguarding issue, and so and so's on the press, and I get the call, and unfortunately, there are lots of people because anyone can call themselves a youth worker still, which is something that we are campaigning on. Anybody can call themselves a youth worker, whether they're got the best interest in young people or not. So we're a vulnerable space to some extent on those sorts of things. But also, 75% of adults working with young people in the youth sector today do not have any form of qualifications and training.
Well,
And
right
so
there, that's the thing, isn't it?
so
Investing in people.
the quality of what we provide as a sector is really, really mixed. It's from exquisitely good to absolutely dire. Safeguarding is the same. Some of it is amazingly impressive, and others is absolutely woeful. And so, there tends to be a focus on the extremes rather than the average. The average sort of doing good enough and doing really well in the middle. And that is such a frustration of mine. But we are making. I mean, look. Huge strides have been made. Massive progress has been made. I mean, even under the previous government, the youth department went from being 5 or 6 people to 45 people. It's a big government unit. There are lots of research being invested in to understand things. I mean, to put it into context for your audience, the state probably spends nearly 30 million a year on research around social care, and up to 100 million a year on teaching and education. We spend maybe 500,000 a year on youth work. So we are never going to have, and until we,
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? It's the value in of it. It's the investing, and it's hardly surprising if you invested the kind of money you were talking about before into training and everything else in education and the teaching roles that you did with youth work or whatever else, then obviously the quality of what you deliver is going to improve massively. It's like, if we can't invest in people, then what are we expecting we're going to get?
Absolutely, and it is down to that fundamental understanding of where youth work makes a difference. So one of my biggest frustrations today, I mean, look, directors of children's services have got really difficult jobs on their hands. I mean, the numbers and complexity of social care cases, SEN cases, are off the highest they've ever been, and the cost is epic. But the number of directors of children's services I talk to who go, we're not interested in youth work anymore, or there's no role of the local authority funding or being involved in youth work anymore. That is now a consistent message across the country, more than it's not, and that is super worrying, because actually, the other thing that undermines youth work, and we've done quite a lot of work in this in the last 18 months or so, is the statutory footing and underpinning of it, right? So social care, there are lots of acts of parliament. You must do this, you must do that, you must have the following thing. Education, there are lots of those things. Again, lots of acts of parliament, Education Act, etc. And youth work has, well, a page and a half in a 300-page Education Act that talks about youth provision, and it's not as robust as it needs to be. It's still a duty. It still exists, and we did a lot of work last year with the previous government, to update the statutory guidance. And I think I recommend that to anybody. I think that's the best. I think the government of the day did a really good job with what we could work with. So you can only work within the law, and the new version of guidance that came out last year is as good as it's going to get within the law. Now, it's still weak. It's still not good enough. So we now need we need fresh legislation. We need a fresh underpinning, because at that point, suddenly DCSs go, oh no, there is a role for local authorities in this stuff, because the law says there is, and it's much clearer. So guess what we're now working on, trying to sort of push for uprating of those things. I mean, we're really pleased that the new government has announced they're developing a national youth strategy, where the England is the only country in Europe that doesn't have a plan for young people, and we haven't had one for nearly 20 years. So, but we're getting one now. This is a huge win and success. So now I hope that's just not a talking exercise, and that leads to a really fundamental document that would lead it to massive change around investment, around focus on young people and youth services, and will ultimately lead to the revival and renewal that we deserve and need, and young people, are entitled to. But there's a lot of work to do between now and the next 2-3 years to get to that place. And but we're up for it. We're ready. We're going.
That's good to hear. I mean, I think the irony of everything you said then is that from what I've seen growing up is that, youth provisions are actually the things that support a lot of the stuff you were saying, like the SEN, young people in those situations. You explain your own journey, education, all those things are underpinned with those most in need in more challenging communities, I would guess. But, again, universal communities. I, and that's the thing, isn't it? It's like you said, it's how do you get the evidence of that
Yeah. I mean,
to a
one.
point, to a scale that is all the numbers in the data that really, really then, that it cannot be kind of brushed under the carpet.
No, I mean,
Um,
100%. What I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, you've
I see it all the time, and that's all I've ever seen.
youth work is the fundamental glue in our communities that holds for young people, holds particularly the most vulnerable or marginalized, even persecuted, holds them together and holds the community together. And I guess why I'm optimistic at the moment is, I think the new government understands that pretty well. We have a Secretary of State who has worked for youth organisations, has worked in the voluntary youth sector. Lisa and Andy worked at Centrepoint and has done other bits and bobs across the youth sector over the years. I mean, I've sat on many a platform at party conferences with her, talking about the need to invest in youth services. So we don't have to win a political hearts and minds. That is kind of done. But we have got to, unfortunately, the country's fiscal position, the country's accounts aren't looking great, and so we've got a big fight to say, well, you've got to prioritise youth services over more roads investment or more investment in the NHS, in or schools, and publicly and politically, it's good politics to put money into schools and to roads and into NHS. It's not quite the win. It's not quite the successful political win for MPs and ministers to put it into youth work. Now, I don't think they've got a choice. They have to do that because we'll save them, billions and billions of pounds in more acute cost, and therefore youth work, investing in youth work is just good maths in my book. But we might have to wait a little while before the country's finances get strong enough to be able to put more money in.
Wow, that feels like that's the reality right there. Because if there was anyone who was at the tables having these discussions, it's you.
Well, we are around those tables, and we've been around those tables. But I think that I mean, look, we did our roadshow series earlier in the year, going around the country, 9 events across the 9 regions, and I was worried because colleagues arriving going, oh look, the polls looking great, Labour's going to win, and the money will flow, almost on day 2. A bit like 1997 with New Labour. Unfortunately, the economy in the UK is so broken. That isn't the case. That's just not going to happen like that. So you have to lay out your case for investment really carefully, which we're all working together. And look, UK Youth, George Williams College, was Centre Youth Impact, NYA, we are all working, YMCAs and others, we're all working together to build the case, to put the evidence forth, and we're much more aligned than we've ever been, I think, and if now's the chance. So I am an optimist, despite the story looking quite bleak. We've gone, in my 7 years, we've gone from being there is no NYA, no one knows we exist, to probably having our best time in the pandemic when we were doing all the COVID guidelines and everyone followed the NYA, to having rebuilt all the foundations, having twice now rebuilt our youth work qualifications, and we're about to, it won't be long before we have to go through that cycle again. And we've put the curriculum in place, we've built all the measures, we've got all these things. So everything exists today to make a really strong youth sector. We just need the cash. And so, and the reason that's important, I think, is because for the first good few years I was here, the message would be, Lee, look, the youth sector is just not investable because you haven't got all this, you haven't got all the right foundations in place to, we just be putting good money after bad. You couldn't guarantee every pound we put in would go somewhere well. Now I can. I know, we know most of where the projects are. We know where the gaps are. We know most of the workforce. We know how it's constituted. We know what its funding is like. We know the difference it makes. We know the quality of quite a lot of it these days. We are really well placed. So you have to do the hard, and it's been really hard. You have to do the hard, and it's hidden, right? You have to do a lot of hard legging, which is nobody sees, to put all the right things in place. That means now, if the Secretary of State says, "I've got 100 million quid, what do I spend it on?" We've already written the proposal to give to her and say, "Do this," and we've written it with young people, with partners and stakeholders. So there's no, yeah, we're ready to go. We just got to find our time.
I mean, it sounds positive. It sounds positive in the sense that, the people that are going to call the shots and understand what youth work is, for one, based on what you've already said. I suppose the other thing as well, when you map all this kind of thing, I can only say about, grassroots communities, for example, there's many, many small grassroots organisations all across the country that have a massive impact, which costs quite, well, not much. Is the simple answer. But then the capacity to be involved in the discussions and the surveys and the things like that, the frontline work will always get prioritised. So I mean, I do wonder, as much as you can only try and do as much as you can do, how kind of realistic the mapping is of some of those hard hitting organisations that do at the front line, coalface, whatever you want to call it.
You are right. You're
But you can only do what you can do, can't you? So
You can, and I will always applaud a youth worker for putting young people in their front line first, right? That is just how it works. That's the pecking order.
yeah, it definitely does. Yeah.
What we need will always come second fiddle to that. However, if you want to make that frontline bit stronger, if you want to build the foundations to make that better and bigger and more consistent across the country, the rest of all the data and insight and information that the NYA and others need is really, really crucial. And there's an absolute correlation between the level of depth of insight that we've got from grassroots organisations and the health and strength and success of our sector. So whilst we try and minimise what we ask of youth workers and projects because we know they're so busy. I urge everybody to find the half a day a month to do what we need you to do, because if we don't capture it, if we don't know about it, we can't celebrate it. And if we can't celebrate it, it just doesn't exist. So you might be in your state, in your village, doing whatever, the most amazing, exquisite work. If NYA or whoever else doesn't know about it, we can't use it as leverage to achieve change. And so we're in Youth Work Week. We're recording this on the Monday, first day of Youth Work Week. Last year we reached 6 odd million people through Youth Work Week, and I hope this year we smash that record and through the Art of Youth Work campaign. But this year's theme is a right to youth work. It is about young people have a legal right to youth work and what the difference we make. But we need our sector behind us. I always say that the NYA's, so we're technically known as the regulatory body for the youth sector. We don't regulate like Ofsted or anybody like that, right? We're not interested in that. It just doesn't work. But we only have the right to do what we do because our sector engages with us and buys into what we achieve. If the youth sector said, "Oh, everything the MWA does is rubbish, we're not interested in it," we'd shut the doors tomorrow. We would just close. We'd have no mandate. We have a mandate because people engage with us. You send us your stuff, and then we use that to go and make the case. So there's a plea from me. Please do the census, fill in all the surveys. If you write a report on your summer scheme, send us a copy. If you've done an amazing thing, or get in touch, because we use all of it. I promise you, it may not feel like it, but we absolutely use all of it to make the case, and it's so important.
I've got some gold I'm going to be sending you, my friend.
Marvelous.
Yeah, I 100% will. I wonder whether you could just share your view really on what you think the differences are in youth work now compared to 20 years ago, 15 years ago. What do you think those differences are? Positives, negatives?
Yeah, look, I think that the fundamentals are exactly the same. It's human to human relationships. It's trusted adults with the skills to engage young people, creating safe environments and spaces in which young people can be themselves, and we can unlock their full potential. I think there are factors around us that have shifted. So we've talked a lot about the financial one. I think there's a skills gap as well. We don't. What we've done, councils have closed youth services and have asked the voluntary sector to pick it up, but they've given them like a fraction of the money, and which means we can't pay them as well, we can't train them as well. So yeah, we expect the same outcomes half time, which I think is just ridiculous. But we've also we've got we've got so much potential in what we're doing, but there are other factors that are in our orbit. Social media 20 years ago didn't exist. The internet wasn't quite what it was. The online environment wasn't what it was. When I was bullied at school as a 14-year-old, I knew, at least I knew when I cycled home, I left my bullies behind. Now it follows you on your phone, right, everywhere you go. So whilst having so much, the internet and social media is an amazing tool. It can achieve so much great stuff. It is also, quite a toxic place at times and quite challenging. And youth workers are operating in a much more multi-environment space where you've got to be kind of conscious online as much as in the present. And I think those things make quite a difference to us. I think financially, we don't have the international opportunities we used to have. I mean, I used to go and do multiple international exchanges a year with young people. That's all stopped pretty much since Brexit. Erasmus Plus has been taken out. We haven't got that at the moment. We hope we might get it back soon, hopefully, fingers crossed.
Oh, that'd be good.
Well, I mean, it might be a year or two, but there's definitely work going on around all that. I can promise everybody. And yeah, so I think. And I think the spaces in which we deliver in, we haven't got the youth centres we used to do. I've often said I've always prioritised people over buildings and spaces. You do need physical spaces, right? But you need people. You no point having a building if you haven't got anyone to run it or staff it or support it. So I think there's a range of things like that. But I mean, ultimately, when I go out and about and visit youth projects, what I just see is amazingly talented youth workers who have a connection with young people which is exquisite, and that trusting relationship, and so in that way nothing has changed. I bet I know for those practitioners, I don't know, go back to my first job. I was funded by the council and I didn't have to worry about how to raise my next budget next year. This year you've got to raise this year's budget, raise next year's budget. You've got to manage it all, and do the job, and so that's so much tougher. But I think as the fundamentals of youth work is just human to human, people.
Yeah, you're right. I guess that thing that you just touched on then, that is, how are you going to attract those great bright minds in if you don't necessarily see the opportunity for a lifelong career, for a full-time career, for something that actually kind of exists wide scale enough where there's enough opportunities.
We do not struggle with people wanting to come into our sector, right? I mean, do not struggle. There's a difference between wanting to come in and getting into our sector. There are barriers because of some of those barriers you've just touched on, and there's almost no such thing as an unemployed youth worker any longer in the UK. If you've got youth work qualification, you can find a job of some description because people are crying out for workers. We used to train 3,000 a year. We now train a couple of hundred a year, right? This is a degree level. So demand for youth workers not collapsed. Demand for youth workers probably gone up. The ability to deliver it and the capacity to deliver it has gone down. So there are, but you're absolutely the point you were alluding to there. The average length of funding is what, 9 months long. People, boards of trustees can't award full-time permanent contracts. That undermines all sorts of things. So we're working quite hard at the moment on kind of on flagging some of those conditions that we need to improve to make coming into our sector more sustainable.
And coming back into the sector as well. Like, you're not going to leave education, social work, whatever it might be, unless you've got that real commitment. That would
no, I mean, the thing that was interesting was, we lost nearly a quarter of the youth sector did reopen after the pandemic. And we've not done a study as such on it, but when we've gone around and spoken to lots of people about like, why haven't you come back? Well, actually, I quite like not working in the evenings, and I quite like my 9 to 5, and I get to see my kids more and my family more, and you can't blame people for that. That's a perfectly rational human decision that individual citizens are making rather than volunteering their time. They've decided to stay at home. Um, but there are, I mean, all the time I'm bumping into people who want to become professional youth workers, who want to work in our sector, but we've got to create the conditions in which they can come in and be successful. And that is about funding, that is about the right training access, that is about the right support. I mean, we work with government to get bursaries to bring more people in at level 2 and 3. We're working with people like brilliantly, like with NatWest, who's giving us £3 million of their apprenticeship levy funding. A third of apprentices in England are funded by a bank. You know, it's amazing. So we've been working to try and break down the barriers to bringing people in, and changing that situation. We don't write the checks, so it's quite difficult because we have to influence those that do. But we've made some quite good successes, and we'll keep at it.
No, I mean, I agree. I agree with everything you just said then. Interesting you said about the apprenticeship levy. I mean, for quite a long time, I've just been like, well, the amount of people that I speak to that seem to know what they're on about say, yes, well, yeah, we don't draw down all the money from government. There's millions and it might even be billions
Oh, it's
that's
something like
left there.
it's
How is
something like
that not spent on youth work? If they're not spending it on apprenticeships because there's not the need,
yeah. So
I
there's
mean, I
something like
don't know.
there's something like 2 point something billion pound underspend on apprenticeship money. I mean, ironically, the apprenticeship levy was brought in to double, and the target was to double the number of young people in apprenticeships and more people doing apprenticeships, and it's halved in the same time. So it's not worked. And I am quite excited about what the new government's planning to do with this. So that it'll be a training and skills levy, and I think it might fund not rather than just
Oh,
apprentices. It might be able to fund more breadth of training and development. And you've got some of the bigger corporates. Like I mean, we work with NatWest, and they're absolutely amazing. And NatWest's, if you're a business that already employs a highly technical, qualified staff team, then you don't need to use an apprenticeship process to bring them up. So if you're a bank and you're employing people with degrees in HR and finance and banking and God knows what else, marketing, well then you don't need to put somebody through that process. They come to you already with it, so they can't spend the money. So we walked in and said, well, we can spend it if you gift it to us. And any big corporate can gift up to 25% of their levy. I mean, it's going up to 50% of their levy. And so the bank said, well, go on in, you distribute it. And what's brilliant about NatWest is they've given us, they funded us a post to actually oil the cogs. So the amazing Harry, our apprenticeship officer, is all over the country, poor guy, literally unlocking opportunities and courses and networking people together and employers. But every local authority doesn't spend its levy, so they can be gifting it to their voluntary sector in their local area. And we've done quite a lot of work around that. Yeah, the potential is there's lots of opportunity, and our challenge is just to maximise them.
thank you for saying that because you've just I think you've cleared something which it seemed like it was mystical when other people were explaining the potential of the fact that businesses they can gift it directly to whatever they would like to if it's going to make a difference in comparison to it going sitting in a bank account, which no doubt the interest will pay for,
Oh no, no. I mean, if you don't spend your levy money after 2 years, the Treasury takes it. So it just goes as a taxation thing, it just vanishes. So it's in the corporate's interest to give it away, or either use it on their own staff or their partners, or to give it away. So, um, I mean, look, there's no shortage of levy and training. Well, hopefully when it becomes this sort of training and skills levy, there's no shortage of ability of us to spend it. We will spend it by the
oh,
bucket load. I mean, and what I've given you is just for anyone who's interested in the apprenticeship route. The way you and I have discussed this is immensely simple compared to what is actually quite a complicated process. But get in touch because Harry will guide you through it. He is an absolute guru, and we do all the hard work for you. So we make it really simple. I hope anyway. So don't worry about it. We'll help you.
I mean, I'm definitely personally going to send stuff around the program I mentioned before, GAP, mini GAP, which is basically training to create young people realizing opportunities that matter to them in education and employment. And it's just like, but to kind of continue year after year, you then end up getting in the same cap in hand situation. So if there's some kind of government way to help these things actually kind of, show the
Yeah.
evidence and then benefit more people, that would be huge. I know we're not there, but that was interesting what you said.
We're going in the right direction. We're going in the right direction. Look, there's bursaries from government to fund level 2 and 3 training, and they've just renewed that. I signed that contract 2 weeks ago. So there's more funding coming for level 2 and 3 training. So talk to your regional youth work unit. Come to our website. We can fund a lot of that. We can fund level 3 apprentices, and we can fund level 6. If you want to get a degree in youth work, become a professional youth worker, and the challenge with it is you need a full-time permanent contract, well, it's a 3-year contract. But there is help on the horizon. It seems there might be some support to underpin some of those salaries, so guarantee that will create some sort of employment guarantee. So there's work going on around that stuff. So but we should know by the summer, by next summer. So applying for next year will be fine. But yeah, there's lots and lots of help and support, particularly on the workforce training and skills front. I can't help people on their core budgets. That's kind of a little beyond our belt, but we are talking to grant and trust funds. We are talking to government about creating the right conditions that enables projects to be sustainable. And in our census, keep plugging this thing, but in the census, we ask people, what's your reserves? How much funding have you got? How do you spend it? Where does it come from? All that data gets shared with government, gets shared with funders anonymously. We don't share your individual organisation, but we share it by region and nationally. And it really makes a difference in how people think about flowing resource out. Anybody benefited from the Million Hours Fund, which the previous government had, and a lot of projects benefited from the Million Hours Fund. I mean, NYA did the work on costing some of that projects and the conditions of that funding, which is why it's revenue funding. It was for good salaries, and it was, the way it was put out there by the government was because they wanted to overcome some of the barriers our sector's having. So they do listen, but the data and evidence that we have is really crucial in making that case.
Leigh, thank you. I don't want to take up any more of your time. It's been really, really good to hear how you got from being a young person to where you are now, and all the good things that are actually happening behind the scenes, which a lot of people, including me, wouldn't be aware of. I'd like to thank you personally for everything you're doing. I can imagine it's probably not that easy. I know that you're talking about this in such a positive way, but the challenge for you and your colleagues must be very, I don't know, time consuming, stressful at times, but it sounds like there's changes coming, and thank you for all your hard work. I normally ask everyone a final question. That final question can be anything you want in your response. Doesn't have to be linked with youth work. Some people are just like, what the heck is that? Anyway, I'm going to ask it, and you can interpret it how you want. So if I was to say to you, Leigh, what really matters to you and why, what would that be?
Oh, I I think that's fulfillment, and whether that's fulfilling, that what you do is fulfilling to yourself, or as youth workers, we're enabling young people to fulfill their full potential. I think it's of just ensuring that myself or the people who work with me or around me and who we work with as practitioners are as fulfilled as they can be, and that they feel they have a place, and they feel they matter, because everybody does. And society is built on community, and if we're all fulfilled, then I think that's a lovely thing.
Sounds good to me. Thanks for coming on.
Pleasure.